welcome to Catholic Answers Live. My name is Edgar Lujano, filling in for Cy Kellett today. I am regularly one of the producers here at Catholic Answers Live, and on occasion I get to fill in to the shoes of Cy Kellett, though they are big shoes to fill in a metaphorical way. So it's great to be here with you guys today. We have 2 great hours. We're talking to Dr. Karlo Broussard, and we're going to discriminate against our fellow Catholics that are fully initiated into the church, and we're leaving the lines open only for people who are about to become Catholic, people who are going through OCIA or RCIA, for that matter, however you want to call it. So if you are going through RCIA right now or OCIA, you are more than welcome to call. We encourage it. We want you to call. Give us a call at 888-318-7884. That's 888-31-TRUTH to get on the line with Dr. Karlo Broussard. We're already in Lent, so if you're coming in this Easter, you have, I would say, about 40 days now, or less than 40 days, to ask your question before you fully become initiated as a Catholic. Dr. Karlo Broussard, it's great to have you on the show.
Hey, Edgar. Thanks for having me, man. I must say, I'm glad you specified that the filling of size shoes was metaphorical, because I think it would be safe to assume that given your height, the size of your shoes are quite larger than the size of size shoes, right?
Well,
so maybe he's filling your shoes?
Maybe. In a physical manner, yes. In a metaphorical, I'm filling his shoes. I mean,
there you go.
You know, you really don't think how difficult radio can be until you're sitting in the studio and you get to see all the inner workings and things that Cy has to keep an eye on as the host. And it makes you really admire him more than you would think. Not that he's not an admirable person, but it's fascinating because there's lots of things going on, and he just makes it so smooth and so slick. And it's I hope I can fulfill those metaphorical shoes.
Yeah, well, I was telling you during the break there, Edgar, there are folks out there who have said to me that they appreciate your work and what you're doing and sitting in for Cy, that you're doing a good job. So keep it up, my friend.
Well, thank you. I hope those people are from Louisiana so they can send me some king cake. I'm not giving up on that. I'm still waiting for my king cake.
I must say, I had a little bit this weekend. I was actually in Louisiana. I spoke in Alexandria, Louisiana, which is just about 50 minutes hour north of Lafayette, and for a Fullness of Truth conference. And it was a great conference, but my mom and dad were able to come and stay the weekend with me and attend the conference. And my mom did bring me some king cake, and it was good. And I thought about you, Edgar, and I was thinking to myself, this ain't Mexican king cake.
No, it's not. It's the good stuff, not the Mexican king cake.
It was the good stuff, man.
Though I will say this, there's a difference not just in the food itself, but also the texture, because and the name, because in Spanish it's a plural. It's king's cake.
That's right. We talked about this last week, right?
That's right, we did. So it's king's cake in Spanish, but in English, the Louisiana one, it's king cake. So
I might say we Cajuns got it going on, because there's only one King of Kings and Lord of Lords,
that's
Jesus
right.
Christ. Amen?
That's right. Amen to that. Amen to that. All right. Well, if you want to jump into this call and talk to Karlo, not just about king cake, but also anything about the Catholic faith for those people going through OCIA, if you are on your way to the Catholic faith, go ahead and give us a call. We want to hear from you. You can reach us 888-318-7884. That's 888-31-TRUTH. Give us a call for you to talk, so you have the opportunity to talk to Dr. Karlo Broussard. Now, Karlo, what do you have coming up? I see you have a couple of speaking gigs coming up.
Yeah, so coming up, let's see here. This will be March 23rd, 24th, and 25th. I'll be at Sacred Heart Parish in Prescott, Arizona, giving a series of talks on the Eucharist, as well as some Lenten reflections, what I call it the Tale of the Savior King, where I walk through the biblical narrative of Jesus' temptation in the desert, extracting the biblical nuggets there that are good for understanding what's going on, what Jesus is doing, what he's trying to reveal to us within salvation history, along how we can apply it to our own moral lives. And then walking through the passion narrative and the passion and death of Jesus, giving a biblical and theological reflection. So that'll be again at Sacred Heart Parish, March 23rd. I think that's the Sunday. And then the 24th and the 25th, which will be the Monday and the Tuesday. I'll be giving presentations both in the morning on those Monday and on that Monday and Tuesday, and in the evening. So if anybody listening right now is in Prescott, Arizona, or the surrounding areas, and you want to come out and join me, for the mission, I'd love to meet you. I'd love to hang out with you. We're going to have a good old time.
Great. It might be a little too much fun time for being Lent, but we'll allow it for that. So there you go. Sacred Heart Parish in Prescott, Arizona, March 23rd through the 25th. Head on over. You get a chance to talk to Karlo and listen to his talk.
You know where the Lenten sacrifice comes in there, Edgar?
Where's that?
At the end of the mission, because we've had so much fun, we have to make the choice to go home back to our regular lives and forego the great good of the experience of being together for the mission. So that's a sacrifice, bub.
It really is. It really is. It reminds me of the
we can offer it up.
It reminds me of the Transfiguration and Peter not wanting to go back down the hill.
There you go. Absolutely.
Not to compare you to the Transfiguration, Karlo, but it's not a light comparison there, is it?
Far from it, my friend.
All right. Well, with that, let's head on over to the calls where we have Michael from Buffalo, New York, watching us on YouTube. Michael, you are on live with Dr. Karlo Broussard. Actually, give me 1 second. Darren, hit that button for me. Michael, go ahead.
Hello. Thank you for taking my call. I'm a catechist here in Buffalo, and with the change from RCIA to OCIA, it's a huge deal for the time of entering the church, and it's a wonderful thing that's happening. That the process has gone from 6 months to about 2 years now, and at the church I'm in, we're actually developing a 2-year process to entering the church. And normally we see about 19 classes, and what I'm finding through years of being a catechist is we're almost living in a pre-Christian era, that I'm not finding so much Protestants converting, and we still are, but we're finding people from Islam converting, Hinduism, but we're finding a lot of the nuns, the no affiliation with anything, converting. And when that happens, they usually have almost zero reference for Christianity, much less like episodes in the life of Christ, or even know Jesus' mother's name is Mary. And it's often difficult when you enter an OCI program. It's almost the assumption that you do have knowledge of these things. And what I'd like to get your feedback on my approach and what happened to this year. So this year we had quite a few people, and many of them really didn't know anything about the life of Christ. And normally when you go to an OCI program, you might get 1, maybe 2 classes really on Christ. Obviously Christ is mentioned through the entire process, but a lot of times it's through scripture reference. And good luck if you have people that came there that have ever cracked open a Bible, much less know how to read the Bible and understand it. So this year, I found we were having this issue with, I would say things, and I could just tell by the looks on their faces. They were like, what in the world? So I took an entire month just focusing on who is Jesus. And I says, okay, let's have a class just how Jesus said he was God. That if God came to earth as a little baby, grew to a man, and said he was God, how did he say it? And we went over biblically how Jesus said he was God. And then we had another class to say, like, if Jesus did come to earth and he is God, what did he tell us? What did he teach us? And we had a whole class on very basic on like some of the things he said. Obviously, the 2 greatest commandments. We went through a little bit on the Sermon on the Mount and Beatitudes. Then we had a whole nother class, now evidence showing he is God. We had classes on miracles. And then I would find this is kind of a general framework. And then for the whole rest of the year, we'd constantly refer to the life and episodes of Christ. And I was just wondering what you would do in a situation like this where you have people that want to convert, and they don't know anything about the life of Christ, much less like things like the Annunciation or baptism or just certain things that we can't imagine not knowing, that it's not even in their zeitgeist. And what you would do, and I heard Scott Hahn say that he thought it's kind of best to start with the Gospel of Matthew, and because that really kind of gets into Sermon on the Mount.
Yeah. Okay.
But
Sure.
What would
Michael?
you do in a situation like that?
Yeah, Michael, it sounds like to me that you're doing exactly what I would do. So rather than having 2 classes on who Jesus is and what he said, like, for example, in our OCIA at our Holy Family Cathedral, the first 2 classes of the year, I taught them on who is Jesus and why should we believe what he says about him. Rather than having only 2 classes, you have more classes, right, where you expand upon those ideas. In our OCIA, we have 91 people, 32 of which are going to be baptized, the remaining of which are going to be coming into the church. It's heavy Protestants coming into the church and converts of that sort. So most people who are being baptized have knowledge of Jesus. So we only need 2 classes to begin the process. But for you, in your context, given that the majority of those attending are coming from scratch with a clean slate, and they need to hear the proclamation of who and what Jesus is initially, then reasonably you're going to lean heavier on those initial steps that you need to take, while recognizing those who are there who already know Jesus, to explain to them, hey, look, we need to be emphasizing these initial steps in the journey more so, given the majority of those who are attending who need to encounter Christ. And seemingly what you're doing is exactly what needs to be done. Having more classes that are focusing on those specific elements, to where you're helping them enter into an encounter with Jesus, as the early Christians would have been leading those to whom they talked to encounter Jesus, introducing them to Jesus. Who is he? What did he say about himself? Should I believe what he said about himself? Well, here are some reasons why you should believe those things, because he performed these miracles. And that's an initial encounter with Christ, because you can't separate Christ from the works that he performed. So you have a class, as you said, on the evidence for Jesus's miracles, in order to establish what Peter Crave cleverly called in his book, the Jesus shock. And I think that's exactly what we need for these particular audiences, Michael, those who don't know about Jesus and need to encounter Jesus for the first time. They need the Jesus shock. But remember this, Michael, even though the majority in your group are coming into it not having knowledge of Jesus, those who do have some knowledge of Jesus, it's most likely that their knowledge of Jesus is so shallow that they too need the Jesus shock. So in no way would you feel like you're gypping them by overemphasizing these initial steps in the inquiry stage, in these initial steps about Jesus. Because for those who have already been baptized and who have heard the name of Jesus, as Pope John Paul II has called us to, and Pope Benedict XVI reaffirmed, I was just talking about this weekend at the Fullness of Truth conference, there is still a need for a new evangelization, where those who are baptized, who have heard the name of Jesus, need the name of Jesus and his gospel message reproclaimed to them in a new and persuasive way, so that they can encounter the quote-unquote Jesus shock and encounter who he is as the God-man in a new and profound way. So what you're doing, Michael, seems to be the right path, and I would encourage you to continue doing so.
All right, Michael, we're going to go ahead and leave it right there because it's time for our first break. So when we get back, we're going to take calls from people who are going through OCIA. If you want to give us a call and you're going through OCIA and have a question for Dr. Karlo Broussard, you can reach us at 888-318-7884.
Catholic Answers Live.
Do you have a question but prefer to ask it privately? Catholic Questions can help. Go to CatholicQuestions.com to ask your question online, email us, drop us a letter, or give us a call. Longtime Catholic Answers Live apologist and author Jim Blackburn or another Catholic Questions apologist will be happy to assist you. Catholic Questions proudly supports Catholic Answers Live, so visit us at CatholicQuestions.com today. That's CatholicQuestions.com.
Underwriting for Catholic Answers Live is provided by Magnificat. Published monthly, Magnificat features texts of daily Mass, prayers, articles, meditations, art commentaries, and more, in step with the liturgical rhythm of the Church, on the web at magnificat.com.
The most original Catholic content is on EWTN Radio.
The most beautiful, the most holy God-man had to suffer the most awesome indignities by the hands of men. Why? Because he loved us. You see, today we don't understand that kind of love. Today, love is supposed to make you happy. Kind of short-lived, though.
Mother Angelica Live Classics. Tonight, 8 Eastern on EWTN Television and Radio.
Welcome back, Catholic Answers Live. Once again, Edgar Lujano filling in for Cy Kellett. We're doing an OCIA, questions from people going through OCIA. So if you have a question, you can go ahead and give us a call. Plenty of lines open. 888-318-7884. That's 888-31-TRUTH. You know, so one of the perks of filling in for Cy is that I get to talk to different people and sometimes get to revisit with some people that I know, including I have another guest here on the show. It's Dr. Logan Gage, and we've known each other for a few years, and I was in a couple of his philosophy classes back in Steubenville. I was in them, didn't necessarily do that great, but I was in them. Dr. Gage, good to have you on the show.
Thanks so much, Edgar. Great to see you. Great to see you guys.
Yeah, great to have you on. So a lot of great things going on at Franciscan, including something that we're partnering with you guys. Can you tell me a little more about that?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I'm so excited that we're able to partner with you guys. We have two really cool trips to Austria going on this year, partnering with Catholic Answers, that people can learn more about at austria.franciscan.edu. We've got just a trip, which is our annual Catholic Studies retreat, where we're going to go to Vienna, Salzburg, Munich, and it'll be kind of an intellectual retreat, visiting museums and wineries and having talks with professors and with Karlo and Chris Check and many the people that you know from Catholic Answers. And we've also got a series of innovative courses, not only for undergraduates, but for anyone else who wants to join. Courses on theology of the body, on dining and feasting with Michael Foley from Baylor University, who's written some cool books on dining and drinking with the saints. Courses on poetry and prayer, cathedrals from both an art and engineering perspective, courses on virtue, courses on marketing and beer brewing, because we have a really cool brewery there. So we have kind of a three-week courses for people, or people just want to come hang out with us on a trip and see some sights. Then we're gonna be there.
That's fantastic. Go ahead, Karlo.
And Dr. Gage, is it true that you do not have to be a student, but that anyone within a particular age range can register and come and join us?
Yeah, exactly. Not only on the Catholic Studies retreat, the 1 week trip, but also on our courses. These are just 3 courses where people can come and hang out. You're living in a beautiful Carthusian monastery from the 14th century in the foothills of the Austrian Alps. And we had lots of people last year that were not just young undergraduates, but were older people who wanted to come and learn and take classes and live in this slower pace of life that this monastery provides for a few weeks in Austria. It's fantastic. It's the best country you've never visited.
And I would assume the landscape surrounding the monastery is quite beautiful.
Oh, it's unbelievable.
Stunning,
right behind us is it's literally the foothills of the Alps. You go about 20 minutes away, you're at one of the greatest pilgrimage sites in Central Europe called Mariazell, right in the middle of the Alps. It's just gorgeous. It's unbeatable.
And real quick, Edgar, each of the nights, Dr. Gage, we're just going to be hanging out with we have some talks, but also just hanging out at the brewery, chatting it up, all things Catholic theology, philosophy, apologetics. Is that not right?
That's exactly right. So what we really want is for people to just be able to hang out with really cool intellectuals, ask questions, learn, grow, sit in on classes. It's really just for our intellectual development. There doesn't have to be some huge outcome to this.
Beautiful.
Yeah, I would say I haven't been to that specific experience, but I did spend a semester on the Austria campus, and it is a once-in-a-lifetime experience. And I think if you have the opportunity to go to this beautiful Carthusian monastery in the small town of Gaming, you absolutely need to do it, because it's something that's unforgettable. Just the grounds that you're walking on, you actually feel the peace as you're walking those grounds. Now, I can only imagine the experiences that you get to go through. So, Dr. Gage, with that, where can people find more information about this?
Yeah, thanks, Edgar. People can find out more information about both the Catholic Studies Retreat and these courses they can sign up for at austria.franciscan.edu. So come join us in Austria.
Yeah, all right, that's right. Austria.franciscan.edu. Dr. Logan Gage, thank you so much. It was really great to see you again and having you on the show. So maybe we'll do this again.
You too, brother. Take care.
All right. God bless.
God bless, Dr. Gage.
All right. So, I mean, hey, for the people who are going through OCIA, this might be a great opportunity for them too, if they have the ability. Can you imagine entering into the church and then getting to go to Austria to experience that Carthusian monastery and courses like that?
That would be amazing, right? What a way to start your Catholic life.
Yeah, no kidding. And I think I heard stories about that Carthusian monastery. I'm not sure if they were true, maybe they're apocryphal, but I had heard that when they were looking to do some of the renovations there, they started digging and they uncovered some of the bodies of the Carthusian monks, and they had been apparently incorrupt. And they're like, well, what do we do with this? And they read the rule of the Carthusians, and they basically said, just put them back in the ground. Put them back into the ground. So I don't know again if they're apocryphal or not, but it was a story that they shared with us while we were there. So highly recommend if you haven't been.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to doing it and hanging out with everybody. It's going to be a blast.
Yeah, I can imagine. You and Chris Check, you said will be attending, correct?
Yeah, so we'll be there representing Catholic Answers. Myself, Chris Check, will be giving a couple of talks, but more so just hanging out, like I said, talking all things theology, philosophy, and apologetics. But I will say, my wife is actually coming as well. So if you want to meet my wife, Jacqueline, come on. All right. Join us.
The saintly Jacqueline. There you go. For having to deal with Dr. Karlo Broussard. No.
Absolutely.
Excellent. All right. Well, we are doing an Ask Me Anything for people in OCIA. So if you want to go ahead and give us a call, reach us at 888-318-7884. We go to Stephen in Jackson, Mississippi, watching us on Catholic.com. Stephen, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks so much. I really appreciate y'all. Dr. Broussard, my question is related to the consequences of sin versus the punishments, the temporal punishments for sin. I've used the idea of consequences to explain this to myself and to my Protestant family. Hey, you commit a crime and you ask Jesus to forgive you, he forgives you, but you still go to jail, right? There's still consequences in the same way that plays over with this stuff, and I just wanted to know. Obviously, that breaks down because we believe that those go away when you're baptized, and if you get baptized, you can still go to jail afterwards. So, how do I understand? There's obviously an analogy there, but how does that break down, and how can I parse that out?
Yeah, so it is true that in baptism, spiritually speaking, all debt of punishment, whether eternal or temporal or temporary punishment, debt of temporary punishment, is wiped away because the full merits of Jesus' death on the cross were applied to us initially when we participate fully in the death of Jesus Christ. But subsequent to that initial phase, whenever we sin, we still incur punishment due for sin, depending upon whether it's mortal or venial, etc. It could be eternal punishment in the case of mortal sin, but let's just say it's a venial sin, a sin that's not serious enough to send us to hell. And so it's a sin, and therefore there is a displeasure due to us, precisely because whenever we sin, we're taking pleasure where we ought not to take pleasure. So there is a disorder within this divine order of things, of human behavior and the association with pleasure, because we took pleasure in a bad behavior, whereas we're supposed to experience displeasure with bad behavior. And this is why, philosophically, there's a debt of temporary displeasure. That's what we mean by debt of temporary or temporal punishment due for that past forgiven sin. So, for example, a common example that is used is, let's say my son, throws the baseball contrary to me telling him not to be hitting or throwing the baseball in the backyard, and breaks the window. And then I forgive him. The neighbor forgives him of the sin in the sense that no longer holding him accountable. But yet, even in this natural experience, we're going to expect and require of him that he undergo some form of displeasure, like working in order to put some money maybe towards repairing the window. That's not necessary. It's not absolutely necessary, because the neighbor could just exercise mercy and say, don't worry about it. But if we agree for my son to do that and to manifest that justice, we could very well do that. That's a common example that's given for temporal punishment due for past forgiven sins. And so it's just basically some displeasure is due. And we either inflict the displeasure upon ourselves, that's what we call penance, in order to discharge that debt of temporary punishment due for the past forgiven sin, whether I'm abstaining from a pleasurable delight, whether it be food or drink, say, or some indulgence of entertainment and movies. Maybe I abstain from that. There's a form of displeasure there, and I'm directing that towards discharging that debt of temporary punishment due for me, or temporary displeasure due to me. Or it's possible that God could very well impose it upon me. And so we have different ways in which that debt of temporary punishment due for past forgiven sin can be discharged. I'm at the heartbreak. Sorry, I couldn't go more.
All right, Stephen, thank you for your call. Appreciate that. If you have a question and you are going through OCIA or RCIA, you can go ahead and give us a call, 888-318-7884.
Why do Catholics pray to dead people, bow to statues, venerate relics? And where do we find any of this stuff in the Bible? In the delightful book, The Saints Pray for You, Dr. Karlo Broussard convincingly defends the ancient Christian belief rooted in Scripture that the saints care for us, that they're our allies. Order your copy of The Saints Pray for You today at shop.catholic.com or ask for it at a good Catholic bookstore near you.
Why We're Catholic is the one book you can hand to anyone to invite them into or back to the Catholic faith. With more than 400,000 copies sold, Trent Horn's book has had a #1 ranking on Amazon.com for 5 years running. Now available in softcover, bulk cases, ebook, and on Audible. Find out what the excitement is all about. Order your copies of Why We're Catholic at shop.catholic.com or visit whywearecatholic.com.
We hope that one of the things that we communicate here at Catholic Answers Live is that our Catholic faith allows us to be fully serious about all the problems we encounter in the church and in the world, but it also lets us have light hearts and maybe even mix in a bit of fun, and that is exactly what our good friend Joe Heschmeyer does in his popular podcast, Shameless Popery. You should check it out at shamelessjoe.com. Joe's got a deep grasp of the faith, morals, the teachings of the church, all that, but he's also got a witty conversational style. He entertains and he informs, but you will leave equipped to better answer the most common challenges, misconceptions, and questions about the Catholic faith. He's got insightful guests, he does on-air debates, and he takes a close look into all the things that you want to know about as a Catholic living today. You'll walk away knowledgeable and filled with joy. Look for Joe on his YouTube channel. Check him out at shamelessjoe.com or wherever you get your podcasts. And if you like what you hear, become a patron.
Anna Mitchell here. Tomorrow morning on the Sunrise Morning Show, John Kramer from the Lego Church Project will offer some creative tips for helping kids fast from screens during Lent. Now back to Catholic Answers Live.
Welcome back, Catholic Answers Live. We're doing an Ask Me Anything for those going through RCIA or OCIA, whatever you want to call it, although the official one is OCIA, so it's the Order of Christian Initiation, I believe so. Is that right, Karlo?
Yep, that is correct. The name change was approved by the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops in November 2021. And first and foremost, it was meant to map on or translate better the Latin Ordo Initiationis Christianae Adultorum, right? The order of the initiation of Christian adults or adult Christians. So it's reflecting the Latin in a more accurate way. So it's a more accurate translation of the Latin. But also, too, there's sort of a theological rationale, I suppose, here with regard to order as opposed to rite, because what it's trying to manifest is this is a journey for those who are coming into the faith where they go through a series of rites within the journey to becoming Catholic. So rather than saying it is a single rite, like in the old name, rite of the Christian initiation of a Christian initiation of adults, it's trying to express that this is a journey. there's this approach to discipleship where they are meant to be discipled by those who are helping them through these series of rites as they inquire and as they say, okay, yeah, I want to become Catholic, and journeying towards that goal of fully being initiated into the body of Christ. So that's why the change was made, to reflect the Latin better and be a more accurate translation, as well as to capture the reality of what's going on. Rather than it being a single rite, it's actually an order, a trajectory. They're ordered toward in this journey to becoming full members of the mystical body of Christ.
Perfect. All right. Well, if you're an OCIA, go ahead and give us a call, 888-318-7884. That's 888-31-TRUTH. Give us a call. You can get on with Dr. Karlo Broussard. We go to Long Beach, California, where Andy is watching us on YouTube. Andy, welcome to the show.
Hi there. Hi. Thank you for having me.
Mm-hmm. It's great to have you. Go ahead.
My question is in regards to the first, 300 years of the early persecution of Christians. I'm coming from a Protestant background, surrounded by Protestant family and friends, and I'm fully intended and going to the Catholic faith. And one of the things that was brought up by them was that Catholicism started in the year 300 or whatnot, and that Catholics were the ones who were prosecuting early Christians before then, and it's a made-up religion, I guess. And I just sort of, I know it's not true, but I just wanted to ask about that, and get some clarification on, who was prosecuting who, I guess, before the legalization of Christianity.
Who was persecuting whom? Yeah. So it is true that Christians were persecuted in those first few centuries of Christianity. This is precisely one of the reasons why we have such sparse literature from Christians within those first, second, and even third centuries. We have some, but it's very scarce, right? And it's limited because of the persecutions that were taking place. It is true Christians were being persecuted by those in Rome, but not the Roman pontiff, the Bishop of Rome, and Christians in Rome. Christians were being persecuted by Romans and the emperor. So you had Emperor Nero in the first century, Emperor Domitian in the late first century, and on throughout the second and third centuries. Now, with regard to the claim that the Catholic Church wasn't started until the 4th century, it's normally like under the reign of Emperor with the Edict of Milan and Constantine. Well, that's just flatly false, because we can look to early Christian testimony and what the early Christians were writing about the Bishop of Rome, say, or the Church of Rome, and writing about all of the sacraments that Christians were participating, like the real presence of Jesus in the Eucharist and like baptism. And we can see that what we, in essence, profess the Catholic Church to be today was indeed present in those first 300 years. It was present from day one. And we have historical testimony to confirm that claim and thereby falsify this idea that the Catholic Church didn't start until, the early or mid 4th century. So as far as resources go for you to check out, Andy, I would recommend a book entitled The Real Story of Catholic History, Answering 20 Centuries of Anti-Catholic Myths, written by Steve Weidenkopf, published by Catholic Answers Press. And you can get that at shop.catholic.com. And then Steve Weidenkopf wrote a broader book which provides a history of the Catholic Church, and it's called Timeless, A History of the Catholic Church. And I can't remember who published that particular book, but you can just get that online. So I would recommend getting a hold of those two books, and that would be a good start for you, Andy, in order to get a grasp, at least beginning to get a grasp on the history of the Catholic Church. And I might add also, with regard to falsifying the claim that the Catholic Church didn't start until the 4th century, as some will say, I would recommend the book by Eric Ybarra, Ybarra, called The Papacy, Revisiting the Debate Between Catholics and Orthodox. He does a great job of presenting a historical case for Catholicism, particularly focusing on the bishopric of Rome as successor to St. Peter, and that being the identifying marker for the Catholic Church being the original Christian franchise. So all of that hopefully will be helpful to you.
How's that, Andy?
Okay, thank you so much.
Yeah, Andy, before you leave us, since we do publish The Real Story of Catholic History with Steve Weidenkopf, we want to go ahead and give that to you as a gift. So if you hang on the line, Luca will pick up and he'll send just get your contact information and get that out to you. So hang in there, Andy. Thank you so much for your call today. All right. Once again, we're doing Ask Me Anything for people going through OCIA. So if you are somebody going through the program or about to enter into the Catholic Church, maybe this Easter, maybe next year, because I think it's a 2-year program now in a lot of these places. So go ahead and give us a call, 888-318-7884. We go to Chattanooga, Tennessee, where Gabe is listening or watching us, for that matter, on X or Twitter, what it once was. Gabe, welcome to the show. You're on with Dr. Karlo Broussard.
Commandments, so not the 6th and the 9th.
Hey, how's it going? I had a quick question. So obviously as Catholics, we believe in apostolic oral tradition. But my question is, do we believe in a valid Jewish, quote, apostolic tradition? And for example, in 2 Timothy 3:8, Paul writes, just as Jannes and Jambres opposed Moses, and he's referencing the magicians in Exodus 7 through 12 who opposed Moses, and he actually names them. And those are not like in the Hebrew Bible. So I was wondering, is he getting, I'm assuming he's getting that from like the Midrash. So is he getting that from a valid apostolic Jewish oral tradition?
Well, it seems to be, because you are right, Gabe, that Jannes and Jambres are not mentioned in Exodus chapter 7, verse 11. And so those names apparently are coming from a Jewish tradition. So there, Dr. Scott Hahn and Curtis Mitch make some notes on this in their Catholic Study Bible, the Ignatius Catholic Study Bible. And apparently it is mentioned in the Dead Sea Scrolls and in an apocryphal work titled Jannes and Jambres. So it's coming from some Jewish tradition, and St. Paul is pulling from that in 2 Timothy chapter 3, verse 8. So apparently within that Jewish tradition, he's identifying at least the names to be a valid tradition that he can assent to. Whether or not that entails all of the other surrounding traditions from which these names came in those documents that he's affirming to be binding and infallible, that's a different question. But at least with regard to the names of the magicians, he's affirming that to be a valid tradition. So I do think that this would provide an example of how St. Paul is, within his Jewish setting, appealing to a tradition that he is pulling from as he's writing his epistle. And, there are others. You have, our Lord referring to the seat of Moses in this sort of, in Matthew 23:2, in a vague way, implying this tradition of the seat of Moses, which we don't find in the Old Testament. And so these would be a couple of New Testament examples to try and show and establish this paradigm of scripture and tradition for the Jewish people, along with, and to show that there's a precedent there for what we as Christians call the paradigm of sacred scripture and sacred tradition. That doesn't prove that it is so for the Christians, because it could very well have changed. We would have to provide evidence for the scripture tradition paradigm for us as Christians, but at least it provides a historical precedent for the paradigm.
How's that, Gabe?
Awesome. Thank you.
Great.
All right.
Well, thanks, Gabe. Thank you for your call. With that, we're going to go to our last break for the hour. So if you have a question, go ahead and give us a call. There'll be a line open, 888-318-7884.
There's only one Catholic Answers Live.
Underwriting for Catholic Answers Live is provided by Real Estate for Life. Real Estate for Life connects home buyers and sellers to real estate agents while supporting pro-life organizations. On the web at realestateforlife.org.
One of the biggest mistakes a Christian can make is to try to do good without God's help. St. Therese said, when we trust only ourselves and not God, our soul becomes incapable of virtue. Her remedy? Works of charity. And the greatest work of charity is to share the gospel. At St. Paul Street Evangelization, a Catholic nonprofit, we encourage you to share the gospel with someone who doesn't know Jesus. Catholic Answers is supported in part by St. Paul Street Evangelization, streetevangelization.com.
Hi, this is Father Mike Schmitz. Please join me for Ascension's Bible in a Year and Catechism in a Year here on EWTN Radio. We're going through the entire Bible and the Catechism in 365 days. If you've ever wanted to understand what it means to be Catholic and allow those truths to shape your life, this is for you.
Bible in a Year and Catechism in a Year with Father Mike Schmitz, tonight at 10 p.m. Eastern, 7 p.m. Pacific on EWTN Radio.
We are taking questions from people going through OCIA. Give us a call, 888-318-7884. Get an answer from Dr. Karlo Broussard. And back to the phones we go to Rayon in Dallas, Texas, watching on YouTube. Rayon, welcome to the show.
Hi, I called before in, I think, January. And I was just calling again because we're at the end of OCIA. We're doing the Lenten groups now. And I had a question about the fifth commandment, particularly the honor thy mother and father part.
Okay.
And I guess my question was more, how do I guess, follow that commandment when I don't have a good relationship with my parents at all?
Okay.
And basically they don't speak to me anymore, and even before I started to convert, I just didn't have a relationship with them at all. And I've tried to, on multiple occasions, reconcile with them, and I feel like, because I was Muslim, so they're very religious, but they're Muslims, so I feel like now, especially with me converting, because I would be confirmed in Easter, they wouldn't speak to me at all. I was just wondering, I guess, how I would be able to follow that commandment without actually.
Okay. Yeah, good question, Rayon. So the exclusion that they are making with you and not having the good relation, it's on account of you being, or on account of you coming into the faith? Like that's the reason why they're no longer speaking with you?
No, they originally.
Oh, that's right. You had said you had a tense relationship before the conversion. That is correct. Yeah.
So,
Okay.
Yeah, they were pretty abusive growing up. So.
Okay. All right.
I was able to. I basically got away from them, and I was hoping.
Okay.
As an adult, I could have a better relationship with them, and they could maybe respect me more. But it's just.
But it's not happening.
It's been me trying to reconcile with them, and like my other siblings trying to reconcile with them. They kind of just want things on their terms, so it's like.
Right.
If I tell them, and I haven't told them, I haven't told them, or like my other siblings know, but my younger brother who's still with them has no clue. But I haven't told them that I'm converting because I feel like it's just
too much.
You know?
Yeah.
Gotcha.
All right. Well, first of all, Rayon, I'm super sorry to hear about this tense relationship that you have with your parents. And the first thought that comes to mind is you've done your part in attempting and trying to reconcile, extending that hand of relationship and love and the invitation to have that relationship. And seemingly they're just choosing not to take your hand, not to accept the invitation for the relationship. And that's unfortunate. That's a huge cross to bear, Rayon, and I'm sorry for it. But be at peace in your heart with regard to what you're called to do as a daughter in extending that hand. But remember, Rayon, like a relationship requires two people, right? It's a two-way street. If they're not willing to relate to you and to enter into that relationship with you, in the relation of them as parents to you as daughter, then, I mean, there's nothing more that you could possibly do except continue to pray for them and continue to keep the openness of having the relationship if they're willing to receive you according to, your new state in which you're at and your conversion, and even with regard to your past experiences. Like apparently you're willing to forgive them for those past experiences. And so you're open to having a relationship, assuming that they're willing to treat you differently now as an adult and repent of those abusive behaviors in the past. But remember, if they're not willing to do that, Rayon, there is nothing wrong with you drawing that boundary. Like, I can't enter into a relationship with you, mom and dad, unless there's going to be this healing that needs to take place in light of what's happened in the past. And if they're not willing to go down that path, you don't have to force it. That's what I was trying to get out there. You don't have to force it. And so to honor your father and your mother in this situation, Rayon, is simply to pray for them, to continue willing what's good for them, asking for God to heal their hearts, to shower graces upon them so that their hearts can be healed, and then be asking God to, provide those opportunities to where the barriers can, be taken down, and to where there will be an openness on their part to have these sorts of conversations with you, where you can share your heart with them, like, maybe about past things. Like, I was hurt in the past. You share that, and you would like to have healing, in a relationship with them. And that's all you can do in this particular circumstance, Rayon, is to continue to pray for them and ask for God to shower his graces upon them and to give you discernment to be able to see the opportunities whenever you can talk about such things, but also the gift of discernment to see when it's not prudent to talk about these things. And that's basically all really you can do, at least as far as I can see. You might be able to go to a counselor, a good Catholic counselor who's trained in counseling people in their relationships with others. And a good Catholic counselor may very well be able to give you further insights and strategies on how to navigate these waters in this tense relationship with your parents. But those are at least a few initial thoughts that come to mind. But be at peace. You did your part. You're doing your part. And you don't have to try and force the relationship if they're not willing to receive you in the relationship.
Okay, thank you so much.
All right. Thank you. Thank you, Rayon. Thank you for your call, and we'll be praying for you, and hopefully,
absolutely,
that relationship will be we'll all enter into, I guess, the face of Christ, right? Because that's eventually where all of our relationships should be around, whether there's believers or not. So, once again, Rayon, thank you for your question, and we'll be praying for you. With that, we go over to Yeli in Vancouver, Washington. She's watching on YouTube. Yeli, go right ahead with your question.
Yeah, first of all, I'm a he, but
apologies.
I'll ask my question. Yeah. First, how would you prove or show the evidence for the resurrection to some type of atheist or some unbeliever? And then I have a second question, if you can answer that one first, please. No.
Okay, so with regard to the first question, Yeli, the key is to either A, give a book to them so they can read it, or B, you get the book, read it yourself, and equip yourself with the relevant information to engage in the conversation. Now, that relevant information, Yeli, is to establish the historical credibility or reliability of specific details and sayings in the gospel narratives of the New Testament that, when taken together, can be used to construct an argument for the historical resurrection of Jesus. The idea is that you look at these details, facts to be explained, say the death of Jesus, because in order to have a resurrection, you got to have a death, a real death, the burial of Jesus, the empty tomb of Jesus, the belief of the early Christians to have seen Jesus post-mortem after his death, and there's a few other facts to have in place as well, but those are the essential ones. And what scholars can do is they can go into the gospel accounts, and rather than establishing a general trust of the gospel accounts, some scholars can go, and they do go persuasively in my mind, to these specific details, which is all you need in place in order to construct an argument for the literal resurrection of Jesus. Even if our atheist friend or our skeptic friend is going to say, well, these gospel writers are contradicting each other all over the place. Well, with regard to these details, once you establish their historical reliability, what is called the minimal facts approach, it's those details that the Christian hypothesis of Jesus' literal resurrection best explains in relation to or against other alternative naturalistic explanations like the conspiracy theory, the hallucination theory, the vision theory, the grave robbery theory, etc. And then in the end, you can have historical grounds upon which you can say Jesus' resurrection is a historical fact. That's a sketch of how Christian apologists go about making that argument. Now, of course, the work has to be done to establish the historicity of Jesus' death, his burial, the empty tomb, the early Christian belief of postmortem appearances of Jesus. All of that work is indeed done in several resources. So, for example, I would recommend Dr. William Lane Craig in his book, The Sun Rises, the historical evidence for the resurrection of Jesus. That would be one resource that you could get. That's an introduction to it. Dr. Craig has a more scholarly work called Reasonable Faith, where he goes into deeper details concerning the historical reliability of those details that come together to construct the argument for the resurrection. You also have a book by Gary Habermas. He is one of the foremost leading scholars in the historical resurrection of Jesus Christ. And he wrote a good introductory book with Mike Licona. And I'm trying to look it up right now. It's the case for the resurrection of Jesus by Gary Habermas and Michael Licona. That's a nice, good introduction to the apologetical argument for the historical resurrection of Jesus. Now, each of those authors, Yeli, have scholarly books, thick books, I might add, that require a lot of time and work to work through on the resurrection itself. But at least the case for the resurrection of Jesus and Craig's The Sun Rises would be good entry points for you to further in the inquiry to get the scholarly research. So that would be a sketch of how you would go about answering that question.
How's that, Yeli?
Yeah, and the second question would be, like, for example, like, I heard a lot of stories like Hindus, especially Hindus, they're like receiving these private revelations from whatever 3 billion gods they're following, and these, especially Muslims, for the other part of this, is they get their prayers answered or whatever, and I haven't really got like a solid answer to that. Like, are they lying? Is there some way to explain that or something like that?
Okay, so this is a great question. It's a bit complicated because it's vague and it's general. So what we would have to do, which would require some work, is to look at specific claims. What is the request? What is the effect? Is it really answered, or are they just interpreting some natural cause to be an answer to their prayer? What are these alleged, quote unquote, revelations? You know, what is the content of these revelations? Does it contradict what we believe what we know by way of philosophy and what we believe by way of Christian revelation? All of those questions would have to be answered, Yeli, in assessing these specific claims that are being made. Final question: is it possible, generally speaking, that God could answer a Hindu's prayer? Like, remember in Acts chapter 17, Paul says, I see you have an altar to an unknown God. Well, I come to proclaim that real God to you. Could God interact with somebody who's outside the Christian faith? Yes, he can, assuming that it's not directly associated with anything contrary to truth. But those are the sorts of questions that would guide our analysis. And I'm sorry we can't do more because we're at the end of the hour.
All right, Yeli, thank you so much for your call. Really appreciate it. Give us a call another time. Maybe we can continue the discussion with Dr. Karlo Broussard. The good thing is we have a whole other hour. So for those listening who are going through OCIA, the next hour is also for you. So give us a call, 318-788-4. That's 888-31-TRUTH to get your question with Dr. Karlo Broussard. When we come back, another full hour. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Catholic Answers Live. My name is Edgar Lujano, producer for the live show, filling in for Cy Kellett today. It's great to be with you on the second hour. You know, we're doing OCIA questions and people from OCIA, but we're going to open it up to anybody who wants to call in. So if you're not going through OCIA, you're more than welcome to call as well. We're taking questions on doctrine, questions like salvation, sola scriptura, sola fide, salvation, questions in regards to doctrinal issues. So if you have questions on that, you're more than welcome to give us a call. 888-318-7884. That's 888-31-TRUTH to get on with Dr. Karlo Broussard. Karlo, you got something cool going on at the end of this month that you're doing on your own website. Can you tell me more about that?
Yeah, sure. So I'm going to be hosting and presenting a live online short course entitled Beyond the Bible, A Catholic Response to Sola Scriptura. And so it's 3 consecutive Thursdays, about 2 hours worth of me going through the material live with interaction. So those who register for the course are able to ask their questions and interact with me. It's sort of a semi-formal, semi-informal, just kind of interaction as we go through the material. You get detailed downloadable notes that are equivalent to pretty much a 20 Answers booklet published by Catholic Answers Press, at least with regard to the length of the amount of notes that you get. And then you also have on-demand access to the videos after we capture the live recording, to where you can go back to it and watch it at will. And so people can register on my website, karlobroussard.com. That's Karlo, karlobroussard.com, under the short course tab. And you'll see the more info and registration link there that you can register. The course starts Thursday, March 27th. And then we'll go for 2 more consecutive Thursdays, April 3rd and April 10th. So we have a few registrants already, plenty of room for other people to register. So I look forward to it, and we're going to have a good old time.
Okay, great. Hey, if you have something that you still need to do for Lent, I mean, that's not a bad thing to pick up as well. It's get you studying a little more with Dr. Karlo Broussard. karlobroussard.com. Check that out. And with that, we'll go to, I want to actually pick up a drop call that person was unable to hang on from the previous hour. Angela asked, what are we supposed to confess at first confession?
Well, the short answer is everything that you can remember. So it's important to go through in your examination of conscience and making that list of all of its specifically mortal sins, like those grave, serious sins that you have memory of that you've committed. Those would be the ones that you want to focus on and present. And of course, even venial sins, if you can remember and think of those as well. But most importantly, the grave sins. If you can remember them, make a note of it and bring it in the confessional with you. With regard to the details of that, you don't have to get into the nitty-gritty of things. But if you can remember the amount of times that you've committed that grave sin, then you want to confess that. If you only have a general memory, like, yeah, I know I've done that, but I can't remember the specific circumstances, that's fine too. All you got to say is, hey, I've committed that grave sin. And so that's what you're going to want to bring to confession for the first time. And of course, every other confession after the first confession. This is the normal approach. You want to confess those grave sins that you are aware of. And if you aren't aware of those sins, well, then the confession's still valid and you'll be absolved of any guilt. And that's how we theologically explain that. Like, that's the mercy of the church and the beauty of the sacrament. You don't, even if you can't recall those past sins, those sins are still taken care of. At least the guilt of them is remitted, and you're no longer held accountable for them with regard to eternal punishment in the case of mortal sin.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. Thanks, Karlo. Thank you, Angela, for that call. Really sorry you were not able to hang on the line there. But for those of you who do want to call in, the lines are open. So if you can give us a call, 888-318-7884. You can talk to Dr. Karlo Broussard. You don't have to be an OCIA, but if you are an OCIA, we'll bump you to the top of the list. You can ask them any questions in terms of doctrine, anything about sacraments, baptism, anything to that effect. You can talk to Dr. Karlo Broussard about that. We go over to Camden, Ohio, where Scott is listening on 9:10 a.m. Scott, you're on live with Dr. Karlo Broussard.
Hey, thanks for taking my call. Actually, my question's developing from another session I had on a Catholic radio show. And I just want to say that you guys are very gracious, and I appreciate you taking my questions. But the question is, we got into, he said doctrine has never changed in the Catholic Church, but doctrine has been developed. Now, my question is, what is the standard to know whether doctrine has been changed versus developed?
Okay, great question. All right, so first of all, the first question to ask would be, what did this individual mean by doctrine? Now, a charitable reading of that statement would be, I'm assuming that by doctrine never changing, he means teachings within the infallible category. So any teaching that has been set forth by the church in an infallible way, meeting the conditions for the charism of infallibility to be present there and take place, where the Holy Spirit protects the church from error, then it is true, no doctrine has ever changed. If we mean by doctrine, teachings within the infallible teaching category. Now, with regard to doctrine outside of the infallible category, that category of fallible teaching, fallible doctrine, that in principle is subject to change. And you may very well find some change in non-infallible church teaching. Now, what would be such a change? That would be X to not X, or not X to X, right? So, it would be some statement like, okay, this is true, and then later it would be, this is not true. Or reverse that. This is not true, and then later the church coming around and saying it is true. So here's a hypothetical possibility. So it is, at one time, it was part of ordinary church teaching, which means non-infallible category. We're outside of that infallible category. We're in the fallible teaching and category, okay? Where the church in her ordinary teaching was supporting the idea of the limbo of the children, like an unbaptized infant existing in the afterlife, neither heaven nor hell, natural bliss kind of thing, okay? And at one time, the church in her ordinary teaching was supporting that idea. Like, if you go publicly and deny that, you're being too rash and you need to be quiet. That's what the church basically said many years ago. Now it's kind of like this debate of a theological opinion. Well, Catholics would be permitted to hold that idea, and other Catholics would be permitted to not hold that idea. We can kind of like present our arguments back and forth and disagree. But now, let's say hypothetically, this hasn't happened yet, Scott, but it could technically in principle happen, where the church would come out in her ordinary teaching, let's say the Pope in the encyclical. It's not infallible. He's not like going to say, hey, you Catholics, you need to believe what I say here under the pain of mortal sin for the sake of salvation. But he just presents it in his ordinary teaching that the limbo of the children does not exist. That would actually be a change in doctrine, in teaching. Now remember, we're still in the non-infallible category. We're in the fallible category, but nevertheless, that would be a change. That's an example of a change going from X to not X in this case. Now, here would be an example for a development of doctrine. Consider this, Scott. In the early church, from, the mid-2nd century, AD 150, we have Justin Martyr say, reflecting on Mary as the new Eve, undoing what the first Eve did. Through Eve, who was a virgin, and her disobedience brought death. Mary, a virgin, through her obedience brings life, and that life is Jesus Christ. Saint Irenaeus of Lyon in AD 180 to 185-ish, right? Late 2nd century. He teaches the same idea, Mary the new Eve. Okay, so here's development of doctrine. The church in her wisdom and through her saints and through the theologians, through her prayer, through her liturgy, reflects on that theme of Mary the new Eve. And then as she reflects on that theme of Mary the new Eve, she has and attains a more penetrating knowledge of what that teaching, what that idea entails, like baked into the idea, or the idea is pregnant with further meanings, further implications. What would those further implications be from Mary as the new Eve? Well, given biblical typology, the first Eve was created immaculately, free from original sin. And if Mary's the new Eve, like these early Christians said, then it would follow that Mary also would be free from original sin upon her creation. Hence, the Immaculate Conception. Notice there, Scott, there has not been a change in teaching. There has been a more penetrating knowledge, coming to see that which is baked into a certain idea present in the early Christian faith, and seeing the implications of that idea. Now, of course, this is not just the 2nd century. We can argue for a new Eve motif or theme being present in Scripture itself in Genesis 3:15. So we see the new Eve present in divine revelation itself. But then the church sees pregnant with that idea, pregnant with the further truth, sees Mary's Immaculate Conception baked into that divinely revealed truth of Mary being the new Eve, and then comes to a greater light and an understanding of that divine revelation involving and including Mary's Immaculate Conception. That would be an example of a development of doctrine. What do you think of Scott? I'm sorry. What do you think of that, Scott? Is that helpful?
That is very helpful. I really appreciate you taking the time.
You're welcome, my friend. Thanks for calling. We appreciate you.
Absolutely, Scott. Thanks for the call. Appreciate that. Go ahead and give us a call again in the future. This was a really great conversation, very informative. With that, we're going to go to our first break of the hour. And when we come back, we're going to take more questions from you. Give us a call. We have a few lines open. 888-318-7884.
Your questions, Catholic Answers, live.
Underwriting for Catholic Answers Live is provided by Real Estate for Life. Real Estate for Life connects homebuyers and sellers to real estate agents while supporting pro-life organizations. On the web at realestateforlife.org.
Pope Francis tells us, becoming a priest or a man or woman religious is not primarily our own decision. Rather, it's the response to a call of love. Do you feel as if God may be calling you to religious life? If so, contact a religious order faithful to the magisterium or your diocesan vocation. For information on the priesthood or religious life, visit EWTN.com/religious life today.
Welcome back, Catholic Answers Live. We have our good friend who launched this really cool app called Holy Habits that you should definitely check out. Our friend Drago launched this a while ago, and we fortunately got to partner with him through this. So there's an opportunity for you to get 3 months for free using his app, Holy Habits, that you can download anywhere you find your apps. So you go to Catholic.com and you click at the top of the page, you can actually find a link that'll take you to that, and you can find out how you can get those 3 months. It's a lot of really cool stuff on there, including a spiritual growth tracker, AI-powered habit recommendations, daily gospel reflections, confession logging, prayer reminders, accountability groups, and leaderboards, and also a connection with a spiritual director. So a lot of great things on this app. Highly recommend. And Drago is such a great person to be able to lead this. So go ahead and go to Catholic.com. Go to the banner at the top of the page, and you can find that find out how you can get 3 months for free on the Holy Habits app. So we got a couple of lines, Karlo. Shall we go back?
Yeah, let's do it. Looking forward to it.
All right, great. Rachel in Overland Park, Kansas, is watching on Catholic.com. Rachel, go right ahead with your question.
Hi, thank you for taking my call. I am in RCIA or OCIA, and one thing that I've had trouble, I guess, just wrapping my brain around is having to be in a state of grace before receiving the Eucharist. I come from a Protestant background. We did not obviously there's a difference in how we communion in general, I guess.
Yeah.
But I guess I've always seen the even growing up, even though we felt like it was sort of symbolic, I still felt it was sort of a kind of a mending type, or sort of a spiritual act connection. And so to me, it's sort of a healing. I guess I still think of it as kind of like a healing thing to do. And I just still having trouble wrapping my brain around having to be in a state of grace before receiving the Eucharist, if my question makes sense.
Yes, it makes perfect sense, Rachel. And so let me take a swing at it. And I'd like to get your thoughts in response to see if it's helpful for you. With regard to the mending purpose of Holy Communion, we as Catholics actually affirm that is one purpose among others for Holy Communion. We believe that upon receiving the Holy Eucharist, the body and blood of Jesus Christ, there is a healing effect that takes place. Like even the guilt of venial sin, we believe, is remitted, gone, upon receiving Holy Communion. And by receiving Holy Communion, even some of the effects of sin can be taken care of as well. So there is a healing purpose that that Holy Communion brings about. However, it's not the only purpose. There are more fundamental purposes of Holy Communion that will shed light, I suppose, upon why you would need to be in a state of grace in order to receive it. So let's try to address that now. Consider this, Rachel. The Eucharist and the celebration thereof is the new Passover. That's what we see our Lord reveal at the Last Supper in the context of the Passover meal. He institutes the Eucharist, so it's the new Passover. Well, in light of that, and when we look at it in contrast or in comparison to the Old Passover, one of the things that was a condition for partaking of the Old Passover meal in the rituals is to be circumcised, is to have that visible sign to be a member of God's covenantal family. So that's the sort of the lens through which we come and look at the new Passover, the celebration of the Eucharist, and we can see that conferring of that principle for the old Passover onto the new, that in order to partake of this new Passover meal, the Eucharist, we need to be members of God's covenantal family. How do we be members of God's covenantal family in the new covenant? Well, it's through grace. How is that grace given to us? Through baptism initially, ordinarily speaking. And we actually get a hint of this, Rachel, in Colossians chapter 2. I think it's verses 11 through 12, where St. Paul teaches us that baptism is the new circumcision. So this is why Christians from the very get-go saw baptism as a necessary condition for someone to receive to receive Holy Communion and thereby participate in the new Passover meal, which is the Eucharist. Even Justin Martyr picks up, so the Didache picks up on this. In the first century, the Didache was a first century Christian teaching manual, and it dates early, like AD 70. It's not inspired by God. It's not a part of the Bible, but it's a legitimate historical document. And in it, it talks about the need for individuals to be baptized in order to partake of the Eucharistia, the Thanksgiving offering. And then Justin Martyr in AD 150 teaches the same thing, that we need to be baptized and believe everything that the Christian community believes in order to participate in the Eucharist, which is this new Passover. And so what we see from the first and second century is that Christians were looking at the Eucharist, viewing the Eucharist as this new Passover. And if there's a new Passover, in order to participate in it, like in the Ode, you have to be a member of God's covenantal family. How do I be a member of God's covenantal family? Have grace within my soul, we call it sanctifying grace, that's ordinarily given to me via baptism. So that's one way in which we can look at the Eucharist and see why we would need to be in a state of grace in order to receive Holy Communion. Here's a second way, Rachel, and then I'll get your thoughts, so hang tight. Think about this. What is the condition and what is required for a man and a woman to engage in the conjugal act? and that intimacy of confirming the relationship. The condition is the relationship. Man and woman must be in a marital relationship in order to engage in that particular activity that's directly ordered toward confirming that relationship. And that's just keeping it G-rated, right? Similarly, Rachel, on a mystical level, what does St. Paul teach us about the church? We are the bride of Christ. Christ is the bridegroom. The church is his bride. On a mystical level, you know, barring any sort of physical stuff going on here, but in this mystical marriage, what is the consummatum? What is the activity that consummates and that confirms that relationship? It's the Eucharist. It's the partaking of the flesh of Jesus Christ. It's the one flesh union with Jesus. And so what's the condition for engaging in this particular activity of a one flesh union between the church, the bride, and Christ, the bridegroom? You need to be a member of the church. You need to be in the mystical relationship, the mystical marriage of Jesus, the Lamb, the bridegroom, and his church, the bride. So those, Rachel, are two ways in which we can look at this relationship between us and God and the Eucharist, the new Passover, the consummatum of the mystical marriage between Christ and his bride, and thereby see the need for being in a state of grace to be in relationship with Jesus, to be in friendship with Jesus, before we can partake in this intimate act that confirms that relationship. What are your thoughts? Is that helpful?
It is helpful. So then when, if you've committed a grave sin, and the purpose of not taking communion then until you've had reconciliation is because that relationship, for lack of a better way of explaining it, is tarnished a little bit, I guess.
Well, you're on the right track, Rachel, but I'm actually going to go one step further. Rather than that relationship being tarnished through grave sin, that relationship is destroyed. The friendship is destroyed. That's what we believe mortal sin brings about. So if you look in the Catechism of the Catholic Church, and I have 1852 in my mind for venial sin. So if you look in the surrounding area paragraphs of 1852 in the Catechism of the Catholic Church, I think that's where the Catechism articulates what a mortal sin is, what a venial sin is. And what you're going to find there, Rachel, is that for mortal sin, charity is destroyed. That's why it's marto. It is a sin that brings about the death of the soul. What is the death of the soul? The lacking of charity, the theological virtue of charity. What does charity do? It gives me friendship with God. So this is why we call mortal sin, because it is a sin that brings about the death of the soul. So this is why St. Paul will teach us in 1 Corinthians 11:27, if we partake of the Eucharist in an unworthy manner, we are guilty of the body and blood. We are guilty of the blood of the Lord. That's the literal translation. Then in verse 29, if we partake of the Eucharist without discerning the body, he says we eat and drink judgment. The Greek word there has the connotation of damnation upon ourselves. Why? Because we're engaging in an activity that's ordered toward the friendship with Christ when we're not friends with Christ. That's why we need to have recourse to the sacrament of reconciliation if we have the guilt of mortal sin prior to Holy Communion, so that we can be literally, Rachel, spiritually resurrected, not just buffed, shiny from a tarnish. That would be like venial sin going into the sacrament. The sacrament of reconciliation, whenever I bring mortal sin into it, I'm spiritually resurrected to where the love of God is once again poured forth in my heart. That is charity, and thereby I'm now a friend of God again. And with that friendship with God, and through that other lens and the mystical nuptial relationship with Christ the bridegroom as a member of the church, I can now engage in that activity, Holy Communion, that's appropriate for that friendship or that relationship.
Okay.
Sound good, Rachel?
Yes, I think I got it. Thank you.
Okay.
Awesome.
Perfect.
Thank you so much for calling, Rachel, and God bless you, and may God be with you as you continue in this OCIA journey.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Rachel.
All right.
Yeah, Karlo, it's so easy to forget that and how grave it is until you actually stop and think about it. It's like, oh, I committed a sin, but it's okay. I'll go to confession coming up, and it's, it just put a little smudge on my relationship with Jesus. But in reality, it's like, no, you completely cut the relationship off.
Yeah, and we don't see the gravity of it on this side of the veil often because of the limitations of our intellect, but we will see it with clarity on the other side.
That's right. All right. Well, great question. Thanks for that. If you have a question, go ahead and reach us 888-318-7884, and we will be right back after the short break.
The word discipleship is often abused, and many Catholics are not even sure it applies to them. Well, it does, and in his new book, Real Discipleship, best-selling author Father Jeffrey Kirby helps you to separate true discipleship from false. A lively mix of theology, history, Bible study, and common sense, Real Discipleship is for anyone who wants to follow Jesus closely. Order your copy of Real Discipleship today at shop.catholic.com or ask for it at a good Catholic bookstore.
When the resurrected Jesus appeared to disciples on the road to Emmaus, they didn't recognize him until the breaking of the bread. The same is true today. In the Holy Eucharist, we really meet Jesus. In The Eucharist is Really Jesus, author Joe Heschmeyer explains how knowing Jesus in the Eucharist is the key to understanding all of Christian faith. Order your copy of The Eucharist is Really Jesus today at shop.catholic.com or get it at a good Catholic bookstore near you.
What was the church like in its infancy? In a word, Catholic, and Joe Heschmeyer has the receipts. In his best-selling book, The Early Church Was the Catholic Church, he gives you the details from the historical records of the first 2 centuries of Christianity. Right now, get a copy for just $10, plus free shipping if you live in the continental United States. Get more information and order The Early Church Was the Catholic Church at theearlychurchwascatholic.com.
Why do Catholics pray to dead people, bow to statues, venerate relics? And where do we find any of this stuff in the Bible? In the delightful book, The Saints Pray for You, Dr. Karlo Broussard convincingly defends the ancient Christian belief rooted in Scripture that the saints care for us, that they are allies. Order your copy of The Saints Pray for You today at shop.catholic.com or ask for it at a good Catholic bookstore near you.
Anna Mitchell here. Tomorrow morning on the Sunrise Morning Show, John Kramer from the Lego Church Project will offer some creative tips for helping kids fast from screens during Lent. Now back to Catholic Answers Live.
Welcome back, Catholic Answers Live. Edgar Lujano, producer for the show, filling in for Cy today. So you're stuck with me, but it's always a blast whenever we're with Dr. Karlo Broussard, taking questions from anybody right now. For if anybody has a question in terms of doctrine, we'll take your call. So go ahead and give us a call. But if you are in OCIA, you will go to the top of the line because we're giving you priorities. So give us a call, 888-318-7884. We go to
Edgar.
Yes.
Real quick, I know they're out there because wasn't it last week we did a 2-hour open forum for non-Catholics?
That's right.
And literally every single caller out of the 15 callers over the 2 hours, except for maybe 2, they were all from OCIA.
That's a good point.
We had an OCIA program last week. We're doing it again today. So I know they're out there. So if you're an OCIA or if you're a sponsor of someone in OCIA,
okay,
and maybe the person you're sponsoring asked a question that you need some help with, please feel free to give us a call. We'd love to chat with you. And you'll go up to the line of callers as well.
That's
you'll
right.
You'll be given priority.
There we go. Perfect. And and there's more and more out there because I keep seeing news stories within the church, how many people are the number of people that are coming into the church keep getting bigger and bigger. Even at my parish, sitting on the pew this past weekend, this past Sunday, you just see it's like an army of people. It's like, wow, like that's really cool. And it's not just for reasons like, well, I want to get married in the church, or, you know, I'm doing this to please this person, but it's actually because people, it feels like people nowadays are actually studying what the church teaches and are falling in love with the truth of and the fullness of the faith.
Yeah, it's happening here in Tulsa. That's for darn sure, man. In fact, there was a Protestant pastor at a particular community who had to put out a YouTube video to try and respond to some of his congregation leaving his congregation for Catholicism.
Wow.
So the Spirit is really moving, and it's catching the attention of many Protestants. I mean, I'm sure you're familiar with a recent article that came out from a Protestant talking about Catholic apologetics online and on YouTube and the effect that it's having. Catholic Answers was mentioned, and many high-profile names converting to Catholicism, but also just on the ground in the parish level, people are coming into the faith. The Spirit is really moving. And I must say, Edgar, that's in large part the great work that Catholic Answers does, right? That all of us as a team do to proclaim the fullness of truth in the Catholic faith persuasively, with joy, with conviction, with love. And that's resonating with people. And people's hearts and minds are coming to see the truth and love the truth and come into the fold.
Yeah. And the cool thing about it is when you walk the halls here, I think the majority of people who work here were one way or the other impacted by Catholic Answers themselves. So we are also a product of this wonderful apostolate that the Lord has allowed to flourish. So
amen. And you know, in my once a month adult apologetic group studies that we do in our home for our home ministry, you know, of the 35 adults who are there, probably like 28 of them are all converts, man.
Wow.
In large part due to the work of Catholic Answers.
Wow. Glory be to God for that. Beautiful. Well, let's jump back into the calls then, Karlo. We go to Larry in Mesa, Arizona, watching us on YouTube. Larry, welcome to the show.
Thank you for taking my call.
Mm-hmm. Go right ahead.
I will try to explain this a little better than I did to your call screener. I'm struggling with the idea of taking the Eucharist in a single species being the same as taking the Eucharist in both. Maybe I'm wording that poorly, but I am a recovering alcoholic, and I plan on abstaining from the cup in communion. Now, I'm struggling with the idea of that being okay. Now, everyone's trying to give me comfort and assure me that it is okay. But when I read John chapter 6, and Jesus says, if you do not eat my flesh and drink my blood, you have no life in you. And I'm planning on never drinking his blood.
Okay. All right. So let me go ahead and address that second statement, because you provided for me the reason why you're not okay with abstaining from the Eucharist under the appearance of wine. Whenever Jesus says that, Larry, if you do not eat my flesh and drink my blood, you have no life within you, that would apply to someone who is making a positive act of the will to reject the Eucharist when they come to know the truth. So first and foremost, that would not apply to you in that way. Now, secondly, notice, Larry, and I don't know if you know this already, but the Catholic teaching is that both Jesus's flesh and his blood is fully substantially present under the appearance of either bread or under the appearance of both bread and wine, such that if you only partake of the Eucharist under the appearance of bread, you are partaking of both Jesus's flesh and his blood. That is the church's teaching. It is not the case that Jesus's blood is not under the appearance of bread. That's a false assumption. If that's an assumption that you were making in trying to discern this, that would actually be an assumption that's contrary to church teaching. The church says, hey, Larry, you're getting both Jesus's body and blood under the appearance of only bread. And if, let's say, you had celiac disease, and let's say you had an allergy to gluten, and you needed to abstain from partaking of the Eucharist under the appearance of bread, guess what? You could partake of the Eucharist only under the appearance of wine and still receive the full body and blood of Jesus Christ. And so, Larry, be at peace, my friend. You're being perfectly consistent with what Jesus teaches in John chapter 6 by partaking of the Eucharist only under the appearance of bread, precisely because you are receiving both Jesus's body and blood. The purpose of receiving under both appearances, Larry, is simply and only for symbolic value. The reception under both appearances is simply to call to mind that what I'm contacting here, interacting with, what I'm receiving, partaking of, is the sacrifice of Jesus on the cross being made present. That's the sole purpose of receiving under both appearances. It is not for the sake of receiving the body and the blood together, because as I've already said, you can receive both body and blood under the appearance of only one species, namely bread or wine. What do you think of that, Larry? Is that helpful for you, my friend?
Yes, it is helpful. Thank you. It's something that's been put to me very simply, and I just receiving one's the same as receiving both, and I really didn't like that short, quick answer. That was much better.
Yeah, so that is true. In the same, essentially, not the same visibly and symbolically, right? But essentially it is the same. So that is true, but at least now you have the theological rationale behind it and the backing for it. So be at peace, my friend, and I commend you. Like, it is a good, given that you're a recovering alcoholic, that you're going to abstain from partaking of the appearance of wine. That's actually a grace, God moving your heart to discern that, so that you don't have to face those temptations. And so God bless you, my friend. I'll lift up a prayer for you.
Yeah, Larry, thank you so much for your call. Oh, sorry about that, Larry. Yes, sir. Thank you for your call. We will be praying for you here as you continue the process and God willing, receive the Lord through the Eucharist. So praying for you there, Larry. We go over to Daniel here in California, watching also on YouTube. Daniel, welcome to the show. Go right ahead with your question.
Hey, thank you for taking my call. This question is based on my understanding that the Garden of Eden in Genesis is like a prefiguration or a type of heaven. So based on that, my question is, could Eve, the creation of Eve, be considered the first human-inspired miracle? I have a follow-up question if there's time, and that would be great. So yeah, that's my question.
Well, with regard to it being the first miracle, not sure if we can say it would be the first miracle. I would be inclined to say that Adam's creation would be the first miracle, because Adam is in effect brought about solely by divine power in a way that goes above and beyond nature and the natural order of things of how human beings come about. And so the creation of Adam, I think we could classify as the first miracle. If the question is the creation of Eve a miracle? I think we can say yes, because we believe that God created Eve in some way from Adam. So Eve is in effect brought about by divine power that goes beyond the natural order of things of how human beings come about. And that would classify as a miracle. So both the creation of Adam and Eve would be classified as miracles. So we could say they were the first two miracles within the physical order.
Okay, so it wouldn't be the first human-inspired. Okay, so then my follow-up question is, and I believe it's 2 Maccabees, it talks about a woman who encourages her, I believe it's her youngest son, to continue in his martyrdom so he can have a better resurrection. So my question is, can our prayers, the way she was praying, can our prayers have an impact on our afterlife? Like, if we affect what we'll see or what we'll do in heaven?
Okay, that's a great question. So can our prayers, I'll just use you and myself, Daniel, as examples. Can my prayer for you help you experience the afterlife of heaven in a better way? The short answer is yes. And here's how that plays out. So I ask God, give Daniel a grace of courage. Give him extra help to be holy, to be loving, and to enter into intimacy with you. And let's say God answers that prayer request, Daniel, and he showers his graces upon you, dwelling within you an increase of sanctifying grace and holiness and charity and faith. And you increase in that theological virtue of charity on account of my prayer request. And let's say you die. All right, I hate to put you in that situation. I should have reversed it here. But let's say you die in that high degree of charity that was brought about on account of my prayer requests. Daniel, you're going to experience the beatific vision of heaven in a more profound and intense way due to that high degree of charity that was brought about within you by God on account of my requests. So whenever we see it in that way, that's the reality of what's going on, we can truthfully say that you're experiencing a deeper and more intense you're experiencing the beatific vision in a deeper way, in a deeper and more intense way on account of my prayer request. So the short answer to your question is yes, we can. Our prayers, my prayer for you, can help you and contribute to you in some way experiencing heaven in a deeper and more intense way. What do you think of that, Daniel? Is that helpful?
Yes. Yes, thank you. Thank you very much.
All right.
All right.
Thank you, Daniel. Thank you for your call. With that, we're going to go to our last break of the hour. That way we can get through the rest of the calls. And if you still have a question, there's still a little bit of room. So reach us, 888-318-7884.
Hang on. Catholic Answers Live will return in a moment.
In Morse code, the sequence SOS is a distress call. It's been said that it stands for Save Our Souls. Well, right now our world is in big trouble, and we're putting out an SOS call for help. Will you answer that call? St. Paul Street Evangelization, a Catholic nonprofit, has hundreds of teams who share the good news with souls who don't know Jesus. Catholic Answers is supported in part by St. Paul Street Evangelization. Visit streetevangelization.com to get involved.
EWTN Radio is growing. Are you an experienced radio producer looking for an opportunity to help forward Mother Angelica's mission of evangelization? We need a passionate, multi-skilled, talented professional who can manage all aspects of producing world-class radio programming. You could be the newest member of the EWTN radio family. If this is you or someone you know, email a resume and cover letter, including salary requirements, to ewtn.com/employment.
Welcome back, Catholic Answers Live. On with Dr. Karlo Broussard. We're going to go back to the phones because there's a few on, and I want to make sure we get to all of them. So Dana in St. Louis, Missouri, listening on 96.7 FM. Dana, go right ahead with your question.
Hey there. How are you guys?
Doing great. Go right ahead.
All right. So I was calling because I grew up very Catholic, the whole K through 12 Catholic education. I considered going into the sisterhood and, just very drenched in the culture and the teachings of the catechism and the Bible. And I think something I've always wanted to know is, so, a lot of people, when they talk about homosexuality and its relation to sin and impurity and what have you, they go back to Leviticus 18:22, it is an abomination for man to lay with man. I was curious what you would say to somebody who looks at the rest of Leviticus, which is sort of a grab bag of, let's just say, unfollowed scripture teachings. Leviticus 11 says shellfish is detestable and we shall not eat it. Leviticus 11:7-8 says you shall not touch the skin of a dead pig, and we all watch the Super Bowl. It's
right.
Leviticus 19:19 is one we're all breaking right now. We're wearing clothes of mixed fabrics. Leviticus 25 even says it is on how the Israelites are allowed to own foreign slaves. So what on earth makes it so that we can go back to scripture when talking about homosexuality being a sin, but none of these apply to the same degree when they are all scripture and they are all, in the Catholic teaching of divine inspiration? This is all straight from God, unaltered, or at least altered in ways that maintain its initial meaning.
Yeah, Dana, the short answer is the reason for which these things are considered sin. the sinful nature of these particular behaviors arise from different things. So, for example, taking same-sex sexual activity or same-sex romantic relationships, that particular behavior is judged immoral or sinful due to things that are different, for reasons that are different, as to why all of these other things are being judged immoral in the book of Leviticus that you just gave a litany of. Let me explain very briefly, and I'd like to get your thoughts. The reason why same-sex sexual activity is immoral is not merely because God says don't do it. Does God say don't do it? Yes, he does. But we can actually give philosophical analysis or a reason why this behavior would be immoral in virtue of looking at our human nature by itself, even without belief in God or appealing to the Bible, and in more specified way, the human design of our sexual powers themselves. And asking the questions like, what's going to be good for me as a human being in relation to my use of my sexual powers? Just like I asked the question, what is good for me in relation to the use of my power to see, my power to hear, my power to eat? So too, what is good in relation to me using my generating powers? Are there certain activities that are going to conflict with the design and the purpose of my generating powers? Well, we would answer yes. This would be a particular behavior among other types of sexual behaviors that would be in conflict with, going against the design, the natural purpose and design of our human sexual powers. And so that's why we would consider it not good human behavior, therefore bad human behavior. And if bad human behavior, that's just basically what we call immoral or a sin. That's a sketch. Obviously, we would have to have further discussion to provide reasons why we do think it is the case that this particular behavior of same-sex sexual activity would be in conflict with and a violation of what's good for us in relation to our generating powers. That's a discussion we would have to have. Now, with regard to all of the other precepts that we find within Leviticus, Dana, those are precepts that are particular for the Jewish people at that particular time, where God is telling his children, don't do these things. And it's coming from above rather than from their nature. It's just basically like me as a father saying, son, you are not going to eat cake today, but tomorrow I might let him eat some cake. And so it's simply an imposition of a precept or a law that God can revoke at a different time for his children. Unlike, so we would argue, the prohibition of same-sex sexual activity. That is not something that God can revoke. That prohibition, like don't do that, God cannot revoke that precisely because that prohibition is coming from the nature of us as human beings. It is a behavior that contradicts our good insofar as we are human beings. And since we're always human, that behavior will always be contrary to our good insofar as we're human beings. This is why that's a prohibition that cannot be revoked or not changed, whereas the prohibition of not eating particular animals can be revoked. And this is what we see in the New Testament, Dana. The early Christians teach us this. St. Paul says in Colossians 2:16, don't let anyone judge you, Christians in Colossae, for food or drink. Why? Because those particular precepts that were binding on God's people in the Old Covenant are no longer binding on God's people in the New. Why? Because Hebrews 7:12 says, when there is a change in the priesthood, like going from Aaron and the Levites to Jesus, there's also a change in the law. Which aspects of the law are changed? Those aspects that were coming from God imposed on them from outside, not those aspects of the law flowing forth from our nature. Kind of like we need to honor our father and our mother. Well, that's something that flows from nature. Insofar as we're always a human being, that's always going to be binding on us. And to dishonor mother and father, that's always going to be immoral because that's coming from our human nature, right? That's not something God can revoke. But the prohibition, don't eat that food, that's something that God can revoke, because it's not flowing from the nature that we have as a human being. What do you think of that? I know that's a lot, but at least you can kind of see a sketch of how we would go about engaging in that sort of conversation. What do you think?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I admit it's something that I'd like to give more thought to in general. I guess it's strange to me that God would revoke, an eternal, all-knowing, omniscient God would revoke anything at all, and especially to, in the first place, allow Israelites to own foreign slaves. And it's like, yeah, that got corrected, I believe. I don't think anywhere in the Bible it says, oh, I'm God and I was wrong. But we stopped liking owning slaves at some point. I think we can say societally, and Catholics don't want slaves either. So it's just odd to me why anything would need to be revoked at all. And so it kind of just, it muddies the water for people trying to understand the biblical sort of push to let people love who they love.
Okay, so with regard to the difficulty issue, just because something is difficult doesn't mean we ought to avoid it. We're just human beings. We're difficult beings, period. Does that mean that God shouldn't have created us? I don't think so. And so it's just part and parcel of being limited in our knowledge. Some things are going to be difficult to understand, but just because it's difficult doesn't mean we shouldn't have it. You called in asking a question about truth, the truth of the Bible and God's revelation. Well, it's going to be difficult to kind of sift through the various ideas here because we're limited in our intellects. But that doesn't mean the question is stupid. That doesn't mean the question should not have been asked, and that doesn't mean there's no truth to it. So that's my thought with regard to the difficulty of the situation. Why would God revoke something? Well, think about this, Dana. I don't treat my 20-year-old Dominic like I did when he was 3 years old. My relationship with him and the way I relate to him is different. There were certain prohibitions that I imposed upon my son when he was 3 years old that I have revoked on account of his growth and development, which determines how I'm going to relate to him and the certain words that I say, how I'm going to correct him if he's going awry, right, and misbehaving or something, how I'm going to counsel him, how I'm going to teach him. Similarly, Dana, God's people, the Israelites, are considered his children. Way back when, they were like the 3-year-old, and God had to impose certain prohibitions upon them to help them out so that they didn't go awry. But given the development of the people of Israel over time, and then just the development of human civilization itself, God's going to relate to his people in different ways. And that's what we see through Jesus Christ. Some things remain the same, but there are some things that change, some things that are new. And so I hope that you can see at least a little bit of light as to why God might revoke something that he imposed upon his people then, as opposed to what he does now. There's a purpose for those prohibitions of the old that are no longer needed for his people now. And hence you have a change in some things. But like I said, there is not a change in other things because we're still human beings. And so certain behaviors are going to still be good for us. So other behaviors are going to still be bad for us. You mentioned God should just let us love who we love. But remember, Dana, that assumes we know what love is. We have to actually inquire as to what love is, to will the good of another. But that just gets us back to the question, is that particular behavior good for us? And we have to first answer that before we can discern whether it's actually loving them and supporting them in that behavior. I actually wrote an article on this, Dana. Go to Catholic.com, type in this, love is love. And you'll see that what I just said, I articulate in greater detail. And so hopefully that'll be helpful for you. I know there was a lot here, but thank you for your call. I appreciate the dialogue. And hopefully there's something I said here that it can at least, like you said, get you thinking more.
Dana, thank you so much for your call. We're at the end of the show, so we can go with the back and forth, although it was quite informative. So thank you so much for that call, Dana. Dr. Karlo Broussard, 2 full hours of a show today. That was great. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks for having me, man. I had a blast.
Yeah, great. Well, it's always a blast to have you on, Karlo, and I think Cy will be on tomorrow. So for all of our listeners, hang on to the show for tomorrow, and Cy will be back to do another awesome show. And also, I have to highlight, because I think it's really cool, this Thursday, where we're not going to be doing a live show, but we do have an interview that we did with Father David Michael Moses, and also the recording that we did at Seek. So that's going to be really cool. So check that out. That'll do it for us. We'll see you right here next time, God willing, on Catholic Answers Live.